Hello, it is a pleasure to be part of this year's virtual BSides Athens event. Obviously, due to the COVID-19 situation, it is not possible to be together in person this year, but it is great to see the event still going ahead in virtual format, and I hope that you can all still enjoy it online. Firstly, I would like to wish you, your family and your colleagues all the very best and that you stay safe during this global crisis. What I would like to reflect on in this talk is the changing cybersecurity landscape that we've seen over the last few years, and specifically from the lens of the defensive perspective of how you will go about defending a large, modern, distributed enterprise. I am Kevin Jones. I am the Group Chief Information Security Officer at Airbus, and I am responsible for the cyber protection of Airbus globally and across divisions. So we have a huge task to do. What do I mean though by a cybersecurity in the modern distributed enterprise? Well, let me take Airbus as the example. You've all heard of Airbus as one of the world's largest commercial aircraft manufacturers. But what you may not know is that Airbus is also Europe's largest helicopter manufacturer, and we also have a defence and space division that makes military aircraft, is Europe's largest satellite designer, launch, build and operator, and we have a plethora of security products, including a cybersecurity business that provides high-grade cybersecurity to a lot of Europe's military. We are truly a global enterprise. We have about 134,000 workforce globally, which translates, by the way, into roughly 300,000 endpoints that we have to protect. We operate in 35 countries and 180 sites worldwide. In addition to that, we have approximately 12,000 suppliers that form part of our critical supply chain, that we have to make sure keep their parts or their components or whatever they're manufacturing and supplying to us flowing. Like most organisations of our size, Airbus is also undergoing a significant digital transformation at the moment. So as well as protecting all of our different sites, different locations, all of our user group, we're also making a significant transformation towards the adoption of cloud technologies. Much more as well in terms of our manufacturing plants and how we make them integrated with factory of the future and bring IoT devices into that particular environment. In addition, we're also looking at how we better use things like machine learning and artificial intelligence on our data and make it much more effective for the business. So not only do we have a huge and significant landscape, we're also going through an evolving and agile digital transformation, all of which we have to protect from cyber threats. So how do we do that? How is cybersecurity organised at Airbus? Well, firstly, cybersecurity in Airbus is not just about IT. We operate distinctly in 4 pillars. IT being obviously a very large and significant pillar with the IT landscape that we operate globally. But it's also important that we consider the fact that Airbus is one of Europe's largest manufacturing companies. We make aircraft, satellites, helicopters. So protection of our manufacturing plants and our industrial environments also forms a key part of our cybersecurity program. Thirdly, we operate around the cyber protection of the products themselves. How do we protect them from cyber threats? And finally, the fourth part of our pillar, or fourth pillar, is people. How do we go about protecting the people that operate in our environment and make sure that they are a key part of our cyber defences? To do this, we operate a federated cybersecurity organisation, which we think is relatively unique, so it's worth touching on. As the group CISO, I have accountability across and visibility across all of the divisions. But Each division has its own CISO, or Divisional Digital Security Officer as we call them, because of the four-pillar nature that we operate in. Now, each division is legally accountable and runs their operations locally. We will also then have local teams in engineering, for example, for our cyber protection of product. We'll have local teams in manufacturing for the cyber protection of the production lines. But we have to have a way of coordinating that. So we centralise the reporting, we centralise the coordination, and we centralise the strategy, if you like, for how we're going to implement all across Airbus. And that's what we term the federated model. Now, not many organisations today operate in that way, but for our particular environment, it's so far proving exceptionally effective. We also have at corporate level key capabilities. So we have things like risk management, we have enterprise security architects that look all across the estate and will do our urbanism, as you like. So they're the city planners of our infrastructure and make sure that we keep the standards everywhere that we will expect. We also have a detection and response capability at corporate level, working with our IM colleagues to form effectively the CERT and the SOC. So once we detect something unusual in the infrastructure, the CERT and the SOC will go about their escalation business and will then try and remediate or mitigate or put controls in place. And I'll come to some of that later on in the talk. We also have at corporate level our own RED team, our evaluation test team. So these are our pen testers, our deep dive specialists that can reverse engineer and do code verification and validation for us, and they will do the red teaming activities. They're the people that attack us for us, to make sure that we have preempted the attack path and can already start working on our mitigations and our detections in architecture and response. And finally, we have an innovation and scouting team that is very much forward-looking into the future and is developing the capabilities that an organisation like Airbus needs to protect itself. Sometimes that can be unique customizations of technologies that already exist. Sometimes it can be completely new technology that is bespoke to Airbus. And other times it can be just making sure we have the right knowledge that is relevant to our business. We adopt a compliance, regulation, and a risk-based approach. So some parts of our business are highly regulated, they're safety critical parts, and therefore we have to follow the highest standards and make sure we're implementing security that is pervasive in everything we do. We're obviously required to be compliant to IT regulations like GDPR and other standards that we adopt to make sure that we are consistent in our cybersecurity approach and that we're able to consider ourselves adopting the best in class that the cybersecurity has to offer, the cybersecurity community has to offer. On the risk-based side, obviously everything we want to do has to adopt a risk-based model. What are we doing to reduce that cyber risk for Airbus? Finally, something I think that is important to note is that we adopt the cybersecurity ethos in Airbus is all about people, process, and technology, preferably in that order. So we don't just adopt the latest state-of-the-art technologies, we also want to make sure that our processes are right and that we're adopting a people-centric approach to everything that we do. Some of that is fairly unique and is related to the scale at which we operate. And some of it is just adopting best-in-class design for what we do. I should say at this point, the Defender always has to be going through a cybersecurity transformation as well. But I want to switch my mindset slightly for a moment. And when we're looking at how I would defend the network, we should first look at how an attacker would come about attacking an organisation like us. And it's always useful to adopt the methodologies that are already out there. And I use the kill chain example for that. So I think it's worth going through that kill chain for those of you who are not aware of it. Obviously, at the beginning of an attack, the adversary will do reconnaissance, both predominantly external to your infrastructure. So they'll be starting doing social media mining, building capabilities around your business, learning how you work, before they even touch your infrastructure. Then the reconnaissance moves towards, shall I say, external scanning of the networks and of the infrastructures. So that's the point at which the adversary is trying to see what you have, what your digital footprint is on the estate. Once that reconnaissance phase is actually adopted, is completed, you will see the weaponization phase. So this is when the adversary is picking what type of attack tools they want to use. And they could be advanced tools that you can procure, or they could be customized tools that the attacker is making for this specific type of mission. Then you go through the delivery phase, and that's obviously where you want to get the dropper or the malware, or you want to be able to try and move laterally through the network to put your tools in the right place. And you can also live off the land if you like. So a lot of APT adversaries will use traditional network admin type tools in their modus operandi. Then you want to do the exploitation phase. So the exploitation is whatever type of privilege you can get depending on where you land in the infrastructure. So you want to have a look to see what's on the internal estate. You want to try and put your tools in, gain privileges, move laterally, and really try and do the installation phase of your attack. Then you're doing either something like command and control to make sure you can keep that particular connection to the infrastructure, or you're executing whatever type of attack that you think it's going to be, or you want it to be, to have the impact. The actions and objectives then, once they're complete, whether that's data exfiltration, whether that's to cause damage, or whatever that might be, is notionally the last phase of the kill chain. If I'm being very honest with you, an advanced adversary will have an extra stage to the kill chain, which is not traditionally spoken of. And that advanced stage is what I would call the cleanup phase for the attacker. How do you cover your tracks once you've completed, or how do you move in such a way around the infrastructure that you want to be undetected? However, we've done a lot as a community to understand this particular attack path and this particular way that adversaries work. And we also, therefore, have a significant number of tools in our Defenders toolkit. And generally speaking, we divide them into architecture or monitoring type of tools specifically, or the process type of activities that we're going to go ahead and do. So on the architecture side, obviously when an adversary lands on a box or on a web portal or something like that, we want to make it as difficult as possible for that adversary to A, live on that box, and B, to try and move anywhere else in the infrastructure, whether that's an endpoint, whether that's a server, whether that's a web server in a DMZ. We want to make sure that we are always protected by architecture. And there's a couple of new things that are coming in when we talk about architecture that are really useful. Multi-factor authentication has been around for a while now, quite some time, and is actually really effective at making an adversary, when they've stolen credentials, from trying to re-authenticate from a second device. It's not foolproof. You can still spoof a user into giving you the passcode or the key or clicking on the token that appears on their smartphone. But it really helps with stolen credentials. And if MFA is in place, you can detect when you have failures in MFA as well and start reacting and responding to them. There are, however, a much more modern and up-and-coming technique which is generally termed zero trust networking or zero trust architecture. And that is when you encapsulate around your network, around your applications and around your data a re-authentication check, because you don't trust your network anymore. And the idea of zero trust is obviously every time a user accesses a resource on your network, you re-authenticate the user. The problem with that is if you had to enter your username and password or do an MFA challenge every time you access something, you would soon give up. It's not very user-friendly. So this is where Zero Trust uses and leverages machine learning techniques to learn about the user as that login happens. It learns behavior for a user over a prolonged period of time, and you can set parameters in your infrastructure for things that user can do depending on the given trust level of that access. And I'll give you some concrete examples. If a user logs in from a different country, within moments of having logged in your LAN on your network, then there's probably something not trustworthy about that second login. And we might want to, at that point, flag a second challenge, an MFA challenge to the user. Or if your policy states, just block that access and monitor. In addition, you can also do things like if a user is accessing resources they don't normally access, there might be a valid business reason for that, but you might just want to do a second MFA check just to make sure. But what about the endpoint itself? What about where the attacker first lands? Well, there's some good techniques here as well. We've seen the adoption of things like micro-virtualization, so effectively putting a mini VM around each application. There's some challenges to user adoption for that, but actually, if the attacker has to break out of an application, a VM, even if they use something like a buffer overflow attack and then can install into the application, it's very difficult to break out somewhere else into the box. Similarly, EDR techniques and tools are becoming very widely adopted that monitor all of the behavior on that box to see what is going on and can block certain actions, certain behaviors, and report everything back to your SOC or your security operations to be able to respond accordingly. We've also seen a prevalence of things like data loss prevention, DLP tools, that specifically look at the data that's held on that box or the data access that comes from that box or that user. And again, similarly, any unusual behaviors can be blocked, or a policy can state that you can't access this resource, this data type, or that area. Specifically, you can also do things like USB blocking or CD blocking or email blocking around data. And DLP is very, very useful for syntactic and semantic matching of data types. And you can really automate the data that is on a box and the data that a user can have access to. That's really good for both insider type attacks and also if a user has clicked on a phishing link and downloaded something to their box, it prevents an external adversary from doing malicious things as well. Cloud security is a big thing. We're seeing the emergence of things like cloud data brokers. We're seeing the emergence of cloud encryption techniques, and the cloud operators themselves are really providing this as a service predominantly. But it's up to any organization adopting the cloud that makes sure, firstly, their cloud environments are secured properly and configured properly. So there are automated tools to help you with that prevent the risk of cyber attack on your cloud. And even then, encrypting all your data when it's on the cloud is absolutely key. But one of the most interesting areas I think that we've seen developing is the notion of deceptiveware. So tools that will put fake credentials throughout your network, throughout your endpoints, throughout your infrastructure, to try and A, slow down an attacker because they don't know if this credential is valid or not, and B, to operate effectively like a honey trap so that if one of these credentials is tried to be used somewhere else in your network, you immediately know that something's not quite right. And then finally, looking ahead on the network side, we're seeing things like software-defined networking that has real potential to allow localized policies and much more fine-grained control over your network infrastructures. On the security monitoring side, this is obviously where we have things like security orchestration and automation. CM tools are being used with orchestration automation to make the first line much more automated to deal with the deluge of alerts that's coming in. And obviously the more security tools that you put in place, the more data you're getting into your security operation centers to detect the anomalies. We're also seeing the emergence of machine learning being applied to try and filter out the noise and the normalities, and therefore you can concentrate much more on the collective view of your systems and of what's going on. And you can respond much, much more quickly if you're automating the process in your security operations centers. There are still challenges when it comes to things like, for example, industrial environments and how you integrate SOC into an industrial environment. And Airbus has already gone down that path, deploying certain technologies and improving our forensic readiness even in industrial environments that are not traditional IT environments as well. So very much an important area. I should say, by the way, that for all the tools, things like, for example, Procmon and syslog are still valuable data types for the SOC, but then you have to manage the large data volumes that comes with that. So even if an attacker does land on an endpoint, the modern enterprise will have tools and techniques to try and prevent that movement, and the relevant monitoring techniques to detect unusual behaviours in the infrastructure to try and move quickly. However, we still want to think like an attacker, and this is where we have our own red team come in. And our red team will do, for example, deep dive evaluations to find vulnerabilities in the products that we buy and the products that we make as well, before they're shipped, to make sure we have the highest standards of security. The pen test team will perform pen tests across our entire estate, preferably as early as possible in the development life cycle, with pre-deployment testing as we want to go from that element. And really thinking like an attacker and having a dedicated red team and pen test makes a company much more secure, because we're finding things before our systems go live, and we're able to very quickly verify and work with the blue teams, the defending teams, to be able to work on hypotheses when we see alerts that might come in. And finally, just to conclude that it's not just a technical view of the world, we have to take and adopt a human-centric cybersecurity approach in everything that we do. And Airbus has one of Europe's first dedicated research and innovation teams to human-centric cybersecurity. So we look to make sure we have best-in-class awareness, but also take techniques that are natural and normal to the aviation industry, like black box thinking. So if an event occurs and we launch an investigation, for example, are we doing the right things? We need to look back at every reason why we got to that stage of the investigation and take a real human view at it. It's not a blame culture, it's really looking at things through a different lens and making sure we haven't missed anything. So human-centric is really key and really important. We do, however, still have challenges as an industry, as a whole now, looking outside of Airbus. Firstly, on the red team or pen test side, I've been very specific that you have to think like an attacker. We do a lot of work pen testing web apps, but what does that mean? How does that deliver value for the business? And how does that translate into, shall I say, the impact it could have further down the line when you chain these things? Everything you do as a red team or pen test has to be done legally, and it has to be done ethically. Engage the businesses that want to engage with you. Look for things like vulnerability disclosure policies, but don't just go and pen test infrastructure without permissions. So work with people, or be part of an in-house team or a team that's contracted by a company to do that. And really think about the system itself. Think holistically, not just about the software stack in front of you. Think about what it's running on, where it's going to be. Most importantly, be part of the community. Second issue I think we have as a whole community is security metrics and risk management, generally speaking. We're not very good at presenting risk metrics that make sense to a company, and especially escalating that to the board. So we need to really think carefully about how we present our work, whether that is a result of a pen test and an audit, or whether that is the current operational state or risk state of a business. The biggest killer to all of us is complex systems of systems. So how do we work with complexity? How do we manage that complexity as we integrate more and more through our environments? Think of the global scale at which Airbus operates. It's hugely complex. And how do we manage that? How do we control that? And to a certain extent, how do we automate our security as much as possible? On the data classification side, you can't protect what you don't know. So really, we need a lot of work on data classification to make sure we know where the data is and what type of data it is. Finally, the other area I think is probably most important to look at is playbooks and incident response plans. Make sure that you have a playbook and an incident response plan that is appropriate. Make sure, by the way, a playbook is not a prescriptive, this is exactly what you do. It's these are the right people you call and you bring them in. So generally speaking, as a community, we need to share what playbooks look like, what they are, and upskill other organizations in how large players do this. What I also want to look at is slightly beyond the perimeter. So a key message is we used to have this model of the security perimeter of an estate. Be under no illusions. In the modern distributed enterprise, the perimeter is gone. The perimeter is dead. We're now dealing with multiple suppliers, data out in suppliers' networks, interconnectivity between suppliers and our own portals. We have cloud technologies. We are really running more and more services. So we need to think differently about how we protect our infrastructure and how we provide cybersecurity. Firstly, application development, as it's being done either by suppliers, the applications we're buying, and also the applications we're doing in-house that may live either in or outside of our perimeter. We have to adopt best-in-class things like DevSecOps to be able to do that. Think about your cloud infrastructure and your cloud estate for most organizations. How do we protect that? And we've seen a lot of the highly advertised data breaches that have occurred over the last 4 or 5 years have been because of cloud technologies not being secured properly. The supply chain is also a hugely important area for what we want to protect. If you have data in your suppliers or suppliers interconnected with you, you still have to protect that as part of your infrastructure. And there is ways and means you can do that. Also, physical security and extended enterprise. So those that connect to you, how do you protect your key assets physically when they're on your site? Without that, you don't have good security. And I will remind you that you need to do that across all 4 pillars that we spoke about earlier. So IT, industrial, and even if you're not a manufacturing company, you will inevitably have things like logistics or heating and ventilation systems that are interconnected to your network now. So consider those. For those of you who make something, whether it's a product that is physical or whether it's a software product, you need to think about that as well, and people. So finally, I want to leave you quickly with some of my key takeaways. Things to remember when you're doing defense security. Firstly, put cybersecurity and risk at the board level. If possible, you have to escalate security of your organization as high as possible to make sure that the board is discussing it on a regular basis, to get the support that you need. In Airbus, I do not sit in IT, actually. I sit under the Chief Security Officer, and I have a counterpart who is the head of IT cybersecurity, and we work very closely together. And together we present to the board. Always follow your data. In the modern distributed enterprise, your data is everywhere, and you must follow the data wherever it goes. Consider IoT and infrastructure in your cybersecurity program. It's a must for all organizations, especially where you have new smart technologies, smart buildings, heating and ventilation systems, or even if you're using IoT sensors for various things around your operations. That is part of your cybersecurity program. And that includes things that are not necessarily managed by IT in your estate. Monitor your supply chain and extended enterprise, absolutely key. If you're going to have an incident, it can come from your supply chain, or an incident on your supply chain can have major impact on your business. Find security metrics that make sense, and they're not necessarily IT security metrics, but they might be, depending on the type of organization you are. Think like an attacker in everything you do as a defender, because that way you will end up being mature and make sure you're operating with state-of-the-art techniques. And finally, plan for a cyber incident and test that plan. You've got to test it. The first time you're testing that plan is not in a real incident. So you must be prepared and mature for your cyber defense. So that's the view that I would like to give you from the defender's perspective. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for listening to me. I would once again like to wish you all the best and stay safe during this time.